Hey guys, number one Marmaduke fan here. It's time for a nice, long, rambly stream of consciousness review of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Volume 1. So as I was reading this, I was thinking about AI discourse on YouTube. Like I had my little podcast on AI and I thought, okay, that's good. I've done talking about that. And all of you nerds are just still talking about AI. AI discourse is filling my feed. Relax, gang. So my basic take on AI is I'm not scared of it. And the reason I'm not scared of it is it's not general intelligence. I think it could be a potential tool, but I don't think it can replace creative thought. So to all you nerds who are kind of like both the pro and the con, the con people are too worried about it, and the pro nerds are thinking, oh, this is a game changer. So what I was thinking about, the reason I was thinking about that while reading JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is if you took all of Hirohiko Araki's art and plugged it into an AI could make images that would look like Hirohiko Araki's art at first squint. But what an AI can't do is it can't think creatively about how to draw and why you're drawing what you're drawing in the way Hirohiko Araki is. I think Phantom Blood, the first part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it's really rough. It's really ugly and kind of wonky looking in places, but it's a genius sometimes making bad work while in pursuit of a powerful idea. And I think he became more and more refined over time, but the way that Araki works it's inimitable. Even if the AI can kind of like copy his images a bit and make something that roughly looks like his drawings. His thought process is unique to him. And this is especially true if you read his nonfiction work, Manga in Theory and Practice, where he gives you advice on how to write and uses JoJo's Bizarre Adventure as an illustration of him applying his own ideas. And there are great sections where he kind of admits, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a little weird. It's a little bizarre. And then he'll give advice like, have your title mean something. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure tells you who the main character is, and it tells you that you're in for a good time with adventure, but it tells you there's going to be something weird. And even in the first chapter, he keeps using the word bizarre over and over again. I think he's probably the most thoughtful writer about what he writes. He's not doing this by accident. The other great line I remember is he believes you should have your character represent something. Their story should start meaningfully, and every line they say has significance. So if a character says, I need to make some spaghetti, Araki then goes on for paragraphs about everything a reader can tell about the character. If he says, I need to make myself some spaghetti, it means that the character's probably hungry. It means the character's probably lives alone or doesn't have servants. It means the character has something they've got to be doing today. So even what seems like an incidental line carries weight. And if you understand that about Araki, it's sort of like a lot of his work unlocks. Every line he's having the character says has this punch to it. I would describe JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, if you haven't read it or seen it, as really high IQ melodrama, where it has the hammy, over-the-top goofiness of a melodrama, with big, strong, over-the-top virtuous men and evil, dastardly, corrupt, conniving villains. But the high IQ part is they make these epic speeches that are really flowery and florid. And they have like really deep inner thoughts and drives, but they just say these in really blunt ways. Maybe like another example is I think that JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, if you got actors to perform it, the ideal actor would be a classically trained Shakespearean actor, and then you direct the classically trained Shakespearean actor to be a big ham and perform the lines with absolute unreserved intensity on every single syllable. And that's the appeal of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and it's unique and it's deliberate. That's the genius of it. Araki is deliberately doing something that is wild. So the first section is a busty babe tied up to an altar about to be sacrificed by the Aztecs, and then they do this blood ritual and they sacrifice people to the mask, and then the bad guy even says, oh, how delightfully bizarre this power is, and then the narrator says, wow, this is a very bizarre mask. So he's sort of ham-fistedly telling you this weird, evil, powerful Aztec mask is going to be important. Pay attention. So Thing number one about Araki is he knows a lot about human history and the world. He's always talking about, faraway countries and their culture and their history and their economics and poetry and theology. And he's peppering that throughout everything. So it's sort of like Araki believes the world we live in is a fascinating, beautiful, mysterious place. And then he grabs bits and pieces of these things and he throws them all together. So we've got evil Aztec black magic blood masks, and our story is set in London, right? Of the 1800s, or Sherlock Holmes London, Jack the Ripper's London. So to a Londoner, London's just London. London's just where you live. But to Araki, London is a beautiful, faraway place. So there's even kind of like interesting sections where it's sort of like he's assuming a young Japanese reader. So he'll explain things about England's culture to them to help them understand it. So it's a very basic good guy, bad guy. Even Araki talks about how in his first story, the good guy is a very, very pure-hearted good guy, and the bad guy is a very straightforward, evil bad guy. In later chapters, things get weirder. Later characters, they might have one significant flaw or some weird twist to them. Jonathan's a very pure-hearted hero, but I think he still really works well. You should not skip Phantom Blood. There's a school of thought you should skip the first couple arcs of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I disagree. There's way too much good stuff in the early chapters that pays off later. So we meet our character, Jonathan. Another thing about Araki, and his dialogue is it's sort of, I think he does on purpose what George Lucas does by accident, is Araki has very memorable dialogue because he has people speak bluntly. So the mook says, I hate rich people. I don't have a reason to, but I hate them. And this actually ties into something. So Araki makes a point that London of the 1800s was going through the Industrial Revolution. So it was a time where people could rise from rags to riches very quickly as a merchant, becoming involved in industry. And it was a time of intense, class struggles. So Jonathan Joestar, our hero, is a rich boy, and he's hated for being a rich boy, but he is a good soul, and he is a true gentleman. And the first scene we see with him tells us who he is. He sees the mean bullies picking on Erina. They're of course evil perverts. They steal her dolly, and they think about ripping the clothes off the dolly so they can see the dolly naked. Jonathan rushes in to fight them, and he gets his butt whooped. So he is actually not a big, strong hero. He's not the best fighter in the world, but he believes in being a gentleman and helping a girl for no other reason than it's the right thing to do. As they're talking about how much they hate rich people, he casually pulls out his handkerchief to wipe the blood off of his mouth, revealing that he's Jonathan Joestar. When they realize he's Jonathan Joestar, they beat him up even more. So one thing Araki does that I think is interesting is he shows and then he tells. He shows you something interesting, and then he has the characters notice it and kind of like in their inner monologue explain what's going on. So as I was reading this, I was thinking, okay, this is some nice subtext. He's not ashamed of who he is. He's not ashamed of his father. So he's willing to draw his handkerchief and reveal who he is, knowing full well that he's going to get a beating. And then after I noticed that, Erina in her, inner monologue says, why did he draw the handkerchief? He knew they would beat him. It must be because he's not ashamed of who he is. So what's neat about this is a neat subtextual idea. And then, almost like he's anticipating kids are reading this, he has a character explain the subtext so the kid can get it. But the reason that he's not breaking the show don't tell rule is he's having his characters think about it and identify what's going on. So Araki isn't stepping out and saying, this is a nice little subtextual moment. The character is showing that Erina isn't an idiot. She has an inner monologue. She has inner thoughts and a soul. So the evil villain, Dio Brando, is going to be adopted by Jonathan Joestar's father. How do you establish that the villain is a bad guy? Well, he sees the beautiful, wonderful, loyal dog Danny, and he kicks the dog right in the face in front of Jonathan, traumatizing him. And as if that's not enough, he has a evil monologue in his mind. So this is the Joestar heir, the only son Jojo. I'll psychologically torture him to the brink. Then I, Dio, will take his place as the heir to the Joestar estate. So he shows you, and then he tells you, right? So what's kind of neat about this is on the nose, but it works from the perspective of melodrama. Dio isn't just evil. He's the most sociopathically, cruelly, kicks wonderful dogs in the face evil imaginable. This is important because this is helping us. It helps me. I'm not just saying generally. Like, I hated Dio after watching the anime the first time, and after you see the nasty stuff Dio does, you basically spend the whole rest of the time reading JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, eagerly awaiting the moment when Dio finally will get his just desserts. It's like an intense rush from this moment on. Another neat thing about this is his villains are evil. They're doing like really wicked, really cruel, really nasty things. That wickedness and cruelty is contrasted with a very pure, very noble soul. So that's kind of like the hope and the goodness that we need to help us deal with the trauma of the evil. So this is a great couple pages because I think it shows Araki's weakness. Like he's really ambitious. Like he puts them in this big, beautiful scene to show how rich they are. But then like the perspective is kind of weird here, and this carpet's kind of going over there. The floor tiling's kind of weird, and it makes Dio look like he's short, and they're not receding enough in the distance. And then his father's got this weird tiny head on top of a barrel chest. And what's the deal with these weird baggy clothes? It's so weird and off. So why do I say that Araki's an artistic genius? He's an artistic genius because he knows exactly what he wants to do, and that's create these hyper-exaggerated figures. So this is an example of Araki trying something that I think is too much for him, and it just looks off-putting. Later, we're going to see panels where he is deliberately exaggerating the body to create this weird, distorted effect, kind of like the sculptures of Bernini or the paintings of the Mannerists. Oh, excuse me, Burp Squad. He is deliberately exaggerating the human body in order to create this sort of dramatic effect. That's it. Again, it's not the way a machine thinks; it's the way a human being thinks. So, Dio, the sociopath, is now an adopted son, and his plan is to gradually turn JoJo and all of his friends and family against him, and psychologically torture JoJo until he breaks him, so he can steal the JoJo estate. So everything is direct. Almost instantly we see, JoJo gets his wrist slapped in school because he's always making mistakes, and Dio is always getting 100% on his tests. Dio is a stronger and smarter man than JoJo at this point. And we see him sobbing in bed over this. So if JoJo has a weakness in Phantom Blood, it's that he's a bit of a crybaby. Now, what's important about this scene is earlier we saw JoJo at his best. We saw that he's willing to get hurt to save a girl because he has this ideal of becoming a true gentleman. Later, now that we see him in his weakest moments, we kind of remember the first scene is what told us who he is and what his path in life is. So when we see him in his weaker moments, we sort of know what direction he's going. Hopping ahead, we have a boxing match. So JoJo's aged a few years. He's bulked up. He's learned to box. He's trying to make a man of himself. But in the boxing match with Dio utterly and completely trounces him. And there's even like a little editorial note that they're using antiquated boxing styles, and Dio is already pre-invented 20th century boxing because he's such a super genius, and he plans what he does and then he executes it. He's going to first punch JoJo in the stomach to stun him, then punch him in the face to knock him out, and he's going to use his thumb to jab JoJo in the eye and cut his eye. So Dio is physically stronger and ruthless to JoJo. Hopping ahead, okay, JoJo's having a little smoke. What a Chad, wants to have a smoke with the buddies, but they all think he's a rat. And what he realizes is that Dio has turned all of his friends against him, and he has a epic monologue about it and rolls around in the ground like a kid crying about it. So JoJo's still a little bit of a crybaby, and the one little light in his life is Erina, the girl he saved earlier, and they do some like goofy scenes of them like rolling around, laughing with each other. So this is kind of like she's like the sweet melodramatic heroine. She's a pure lady. She's chaste, she's sweet, she's kind, and they just love each other like just two adorable little kids, and are splashing around. And there's even like a great scene that sets something up where JoJo carves their name in the tree. JoJo loves Erina, and she says, "Oh, JoJo, you scoundrel." So even just like the suggestion that he loves her is enough to make her blush. She is virginal. Dio, the bastard, shows up and he decides that in order to torture JoJo, he will steal Erina's first kiss away from JoJo as a way of his plan is if I assault her, then this will create a terrible memory and she won't be able to look at JoJo the same way ever again. I'll steal the love away from JoJo, that cruel bastard. Okay, here's a great line. Two men look out through the same bars. One sees the mud and the other stars, by Frederick Longbridge. So again, Araki's well-read. He reads British poetry and he collects these beautiful lines, and then the line says exactly what he wants to do with these characters. There are two handsome, strong, masculine men, but one is a seditious bastard who's ruled by ambition and selfishness, and one is a noble soul striving to honor his father and protect the girl he loves. And this change in outlook is what separates them and puts them at odds with one another. So again, more mannerist, the twisting of the body, crazy, over-the-top, lithe figure. So this is his strength. If earlier we saw his weakness, which is like sometimes we'll have like dudes who look weird or things that don't exactly feel right, his strength is purposefully making weird contorted figures that have this grace and movement and flow to them. And this is the famous line, the first person you kissed wasn't JoJo, it was me, Dio. Again, we get the theme of interesting subtextual moment contrasted with characters identifying and explaining clearly what the subtext is. So Erina washes out her mouth with mud because she can't stand Dio. This angers Dio and he slaps her. By the way, she looks at him defiantly. So Erina is physically weak. She is not capable of fighting someone like Dio. But though she lacks physical strength, Erina has moral courage. She refuses to be cowed by a cruel man who abuses her. And basically, you can hit me, but you can't break my spirit. You can't. And what the bad guys realize is she's doing this on purpose as a way of irritating him. I find you so disgusting, I'd rather wash my mouth out with mud than think of you kissing me, basically. So this also sets up that Dio has a temper. He thinks of himself as this cool, controlled sociopath who's going to get everything he wants, but his temper is it could be the undoing of him. What's also nice about this is Erina has the same problem as JoJo. Both of them are physically weaker than Dio. So both of them have to have the moral courage to endure Dio's psychopathic cruelty and barbarism until JoJo becomes a strong enough man that he can defend himself and defend the girl he loves from Dio. What's really weird about this is it's sort of like this is double seditious. It's also contorted and weird, and the bad guys are so perverted, and it's all kind of gay, right? Like, why are all the men so suspiciously effeminate? But then the morals of the story are hyper traditional and very, very Christian. Like, this is Christian Europe. I think Jonathan Joestar, he's maybe not explicitly depicted as a Christian on page, but like he has a cross on his tombstone. Jonathan Joestar is a Christian, right? He represents the Christian ideal of the gentleman. And it's kind of interesting that this very sweet message is delivered in this really weird, bizarre, kind of twisted, contorted world. So later, Joestar's dad tells Dio about how important the dog Danny is to Jonathan. He used to be a cruel little boy, but then he fell in love with this dog. The dog once saved Jonathan's life. He understands the value of life. What an incredible dog. So I want to talk about the dialogue again. The dialogue is punchy, and it says things bluntly. The characters express themselves with this kind of force where the point of the scene is Jonathan has this wonderful, beautiful dog that has saved his life, and it's an intelligent and sweet dog. So the father expresses this sort of awe and wonder of the dog. So it's kind of funny because of just how blunt it is. But the father is expressing the emotion that Araki wants you to take away about Danny. Danny is a wonderful, very special doggo. I wonder if this will be important later. So later we see that Erina actually is haunted by the memory of Dio's kiss. So Dio's plan worked out. She's a sweet, pure girl. Even though it's not JoJo's fault, the memory of being shamed by Dio has harmed Irina, and it's making her hard to be close to Jonathan. So she's pure, she's sweet, but the harm that's done to her has a lasting effect. And Jonathan starts to pick up that Dio's the one who's doing this to him. So in a fury, Jonathan puts two and two together that Dio must have done something to Irina. So he goes and he starts beating the ever-loving crap out of Dio. Now, what's important about this is earlier Dio kicked Jonathan's ass. Earlier, it was established that Dio is stronger than Jonathan, and Jonathan can't beat Dio in a fight. But Jonathan, through the force of his will, just keeps pushing, and he doesn't care if he gets hit, so long as he can get a hit in on Dio. So what's helping Jonathan overcome Dio is perseverance and force of will. Here's a great panel. So this is an example of almost mannerist, unrealistic, abstract distorting of the figure in order to say something. This is going to be the biggest super duper punch ever, and every little ounce of this weird contorted punch in his body is telling you how super duper this punch is going to be. Finally, a punch in the face to that bastard. Hopefully the first of many to come. As we jump ahead, of course, Dio finds a way to twist this so that Dad thinks that Jonathan's the one who started the fight. He pretends to be oh so hurt and cry like a baby, but behind his back he's got a knife and he's ready to stab Jonathan. So every single scene, every little interaction between these two and every line is continually reinforcing this idea. The pure, the noble, the true, trying to become stronger, the seditious, the selfish, the manipulative, that doesn't care about honor and fair play. Hopping ahead again, spoiler, Dio kills Danny the dog to strike back at JoJo. And the dog is burned alive, and we see the dog burning alive. It's extra traumatic, and part of what makes it extra traumatic is he's actually established that this is a very sweet and wonderful dog. So from this point on, the concrete thought at the back of my mind is Dio must die. So the reason you shouldn't skip Phantom Blood is if you had skipped Phantom Blood and gone straight to Stardust Crusaders, Dio returns from the dead and the heroes have to go and kick Dio's butt. That's the right. So if the plot of Stardust Crusaders is we need to kick Dio's butt, Phantom Blood is telling you why it is so desperately important that Dio's butt gets kicked. The scene has payoff later. What's neat is that I think Araki. I actually don't know if Araki knew or not that this was going to be ongoing, and he was going to keep telling more and more JoJo stories across the generation. Some of his interviews make it sound like he did have in mind an idea of continuing this across time. I don't know how much he planned this all out. He is a pretty meticulous writer, so maybe he did know that there were plans to have Dio show up in later stories. So anyway, hopping ahead, the kids jump forward in time, and now they're both older and really buff and really strong. And Dio is such a good manipulator that he's actually successfully gaslit Jonathan into thinking, well, maybe that was all a misunderstanding. Maybe he didn't do anything to Irina. Maybe I just misjudged him, and he really is a good guy. But of course, in his heart of hearts, Dio is still evil and conspiring to destroy Jonathan. When we jump ahead, we see that Dio has a tragic backstory. His father was an abusive drunk. Now, what I love about this is this does not excuse anything that Dio has done. And the narrative actually makes a point of this. This explains part of Dio's motivation. He had a wicked, drunk father who was sort of stupid, and Dio was ashamed of his father. So he wants to bury his father. He literally spit on his father's grave when we first met him. And he wants to get past the memory of the father by making himself into a sociopathic monster. None of that excuses what Dio does. It only explains what Dio is doing. So his plan is to get poison to kill George Joestar so he can inherit the wealth now. Jonathan begins. Did I skip anything important? I have a bookmark. Why do I have a bookmark here? Hold on. When I have a bookmark, that usually means I want to talk about. Oh, yeah, I do. Okay. So Jonathan starts to suspect that his father's being poisoned, so he goes to investigate. And again, he dresses up in like a goofy Sherlock Holmes hat, because it's like, hey, kids, it's London. What would be a cool thing for London guys to wear? Sherlock Holmes hats and top hats and bowler hats. And look at this weird outfit. Like, it's got giant checkerboard patterns on it and a big flowing cape, but a little bow tie and a giant belt and a tunic that reveals the form of his muscles and gloves. This is so weird. It's so different. So Jonathan goes to investigate in the slums, and he meets Speedwagon. Look, if you skip Phantom Blood, you miss getting to meet Speedwagon, who's basically, he has a bowler hat, and his bowler hat is a razor blade. Another reason I marked this page, this is kind of neat. So the panel, the action from the panel carries on throughout the rest of the page. So it starts on his head and spirals out like this. And then that line carries through here into the gutter between the two panels, coming around back up here, right? So you get caught in this sort of beautiful Ouroboros pattern forever. That's great stuff. Relating the action in the art to the page itself. So that's Speedwagon's deal. He's got a cool razor blade hat, and JoJo manages to win the fight by being fearless. He's willing to take a hit in order to land a hit on his opponent. And Speedwagon is impressed both by JoJo's strength, but also his mercy. JoJo had the opportunity to kill Speedwagon with a single hit, but he didn't take the opportunity. So Speedwagon decides that the rich boy must be all right. So meanwhile, Dio is investigating that weird, mysterious Aztec mask. I forgot to mention this, but frequently we're shown pictures of the mask in order to remind us that there's something important about this. This evil mask is going to be important. So while Dio's playing around with it, he finds out that the mask has the power to turn people into zombies. He finds this out by accident because he turns a mugger into a zombie, and the zombie vampire starts attacking him. And he discovers that these vampires are superhumanly strong. So Dio has nearly killed himself through his own shenanigans. So not only does Araki do interesting subtext with the personality of his characters that's then expounded through really punchy dialogue, he also does the same thing in action scenes. He will show you something interesting in the action scene, and then he'll have the character's inner monologue explain the significance of what's going on. So the vampire punches a wall, and then his fist crunches and pulverizes as he hits the wall, and then it creates this giant crater. So the idea is that a vampire can punch with this super strength, but the body isn't necessarily strong enough to survive the impact of the super punches. And then Dio actually notices that and realizes what's going on. So his inner monologue is, I see, he doesn't have the strength to control his power, but his blows are super strong. So Dio's smart enough to put two and two together on what's going on. And if you missed this, if you're a kid and you missed that, Dio's explanation would help you understand the subtext. I think I lost the bookmark, but basically Dio tries to tell his sob story when he's caught, and Speedwagon comes out and calls him a charlatan and a crook. So basically, Speedwagon has no interest in Dio's little sad sob story about how my father was mean to me. Speedwagon shows up and says, your face seems to be saying, who the hell is that? Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Speedwagon, the meddler. And then this guy stinks worse than vomit. In fact, I've never met someone as rotten as you. The product of your environment? I think not. So, what's great about this is the characters are bringing into light what has previously been subtext. So previously the subtext has been that Dio's a sociopath and he blames all of his evil on his sad upbringing. And then Speedwagon just comes right out and calls him tells him he stinks and he's a big fat rotten idiot, right? The characters are expressing what we in the audience feel in this larger than life way. In the interview, what's kind of interesting is Araki came back and drew his characters after years, and you can see his style changed a lot. So older Araki, I think, is a lot more glamorous. He's a lot more influenced by like fashion magazines. His characters are a little bit more androgynous and have maybe, kind of like have that androgynous, effeminate beauty to them, whereas Joestar in his early art is very squarish. And then in his interview, he even kind of like talks about, he reflects on the characters. And he actually kind of like observes the things that I was observing, like Jonathan's kind of a straight-laced hero. But then he kind of thinks maybe it's because I was a young writer and I was still getting used to the craft of the writing. But maybe it was also because I wanted a character who represented a very pure, virtuous idea. And what's neat about that is because the later protagonists are more messed up than Jonathan. The fact that Jonathan is so pure-hearted, it's sort of like Jonathan represents the spirit of heroism that the later Joe stars, they pick up that mantle and carry it in spite of their weaknesses. So I really do like Jonathan. He is more straight-laced than the later characters, but that straight-laced aspect of him is deliberate. It's all about creating the contrast between Jonathan as pure-hearted and Dio as a malevolent bastard. And someone questioned, did Dio and Danny make up just for the cover? Oh, this hurts so much. I want to punch Dio in the face so much. So basically, Araki is probably the most thoughtful person I've ever seen about the significance of his craft and what he's doing. Like he's literally written a book about how he wrote JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and the thought he put into it. So AI cannot reproduce this. This is the product of someone who has an idea that he wants to express. I want to tell a bizarre adventure about the wonder and beauty of the world that represents the spirit of heroic, gentlemanly, virtuous masculinity up against seditious, corrupt, selfish, destructive evil. And I want that represented in sort of weirdly gay-looking, big, strong men. So, right? But apparently they all marry girls at the end. So are they gay? I don't know. They seem gay, but they act so straight. I can't tell. So that's JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Volume 1. Chef's kiss. It's so unique. There's nothing like it. You've got to read it. I don't care if it has weird, wonky panels. It's the product of a genius. Do not skip Phantom Blood and Battle Tendency. It's actually so weird. Think about how weird this is, right? Like the later volumes get even weirder. Like I don't think you actually should jump into Stardust Crusaders right away, because then it's just going to be maximum weirdness. We almost need a nice, straightforward hero just to kind of get us warmed up for how weird things are going to get. That's it. That's my pitch on why you should start JoJo's Bizarre Adventure with Phantom Blood. Love you guys. I'll catch you later.